Aloha. Welcome to American Issues Take One. I'm Tim Apicella, your host, and today's title is Trump's Slow Walk to a Constitutional Crisis. Today, Press Secretary Carolyn Leavitt said that the rulings against Donald Trump's administration is coming from judicial activists. And on the bench, those decisions amount to a constitutional crisis. You know, there's been about 50 lawsuits filed. And of the 50, most of those, many of them, have been blocked by judges. And these blocked executive orders come from anywhere from birthright citizenship to access of the Doge interns into the Treasury Department records. Elon Musk, of course, is a big part of that. And then, of course, the mass benefit packet to lay off federal workers, or not lay them off, but to see their resignations. So all these executive orders have been blocked by judges. And this leads us to what Leavitt's called, judges, as the weaponization of the judicial system. Now, correct me if I'm wrong, but wasn't it about a week or a week and a half ago that Press Secretary Carolyn Leavitt said, "I'm only going to tell you the truth"? Well, we're going to discuss whether that's true or not. And with me is my esteemed guest, Ben Davis, Emeritus Professor of Law at the University of Toledo, and my co-host, Jay Fidell. Jay, to you first. We're looking at all these executive orders, and many of those executive orders have been blocked temporarily by a variety of judges across the districts, district courts. And just to name a few is the end of birthright citizenship, the freezing of federal spending for various agencies, the buyout of federal workers, U.S. aid workers put on leave, transgender prisoners forced to go into male prisons, Doge, the powers, Elon Musk and his interns going into Treasury records, other agency records. So these are just a few where judges have come down and said, no, we're going to put an injunction on many of these executive orders. So of that, our Vice President, J.D. Vance, said that the judges are basically against the law. They're acting against the law. That the judges are not allowed to limit the legitimate power of the President of the United States. And he cited, if a judge told a general how to conduct his military campaign, that would be illegal. Or if a judge told the attorney general how to use discretion as a prosecutor, that will be illegal. He's taking this a bit far, I think, and I want to get your opinion about where we are with these judges' injunctions versus what J.D. Vance says and Carolyn Leavitt says about whether these judges are overreaching their authoritative powers in their rulings.
It's ironic that she and Trump should call the bench activist, because in fact he has created an activist Supreme Court. One second. He, in fact, has created an activist Supreme Court, which makes new rules that you never heard of, that have no basis in precedent on a regular basis. That's an activist court. And for them to criticize these other judges as activists is ridiculous. I mean, really ridiculous. Upside down. We are living in an upside down world right now. So you called this. Sorry, Tim. I'll fix it. You call this slow walk to constitutional crisis. But I want to add this thought. It's not a slow walk, and it is a constitutional crisis. When you see that one branch repeatedly continuing to ignore the rulings of another branch, and call out silly things like activist courts. That's ridiculous. We can't accept that. We can't believe Carolyn Levitt for a minute. She is lying. But more than that, what you have is a cumulative effect. I think Ben will agree with me. It's not just one of the things you mentioned or the things you haven't mentioned. It's a cumulative total of all the things that Trump is doing with regard to our constitutional system. And some of them are absolutely unconstitutional. Some of them are arguably unconstitutional, but taken collectively, taken cumulatively, what you have is one branch ignoring the other two. He's managed to undermine the Congress, and he's now undermining the courts because they don't agree with him. So it's really quite extraordinary. I mean, for example, just one example is the birthright issue. So the court, a couple of courts, several courts found out that, found and determined that his executive order about birthright citizenship was unconstitutional. He continues to press down on that. He has said more recently that he is going to ignore the courts. That's a constitutional crisis for sure. These are federal courts established by the Constitution, and he is ignoring them and said he would continue to ignore him. He has ignored them and said he would continue to ignore them. Okay, and there's all these other things you mentioned where he's terminating funding that was appropriated by Congress, where he's taking down agencies, terminating agencies that were created by Congress. But, the more pernicious thing is that he's ignoring due process on this deportation and Guantanamo affair. Before you know it, it'll affect a lot more than immigrants. He is attacking the First Amendment. He is attacking free speech. So this is of great concern. The balance of power is being dismantled at the same time. And he's doing all these things at once, instantly. So, and putting Musk in charge, is that constitutional? I doubt it. So what you have is this cumulative effect. So I would change the title of the show is from Slow Walk to Immediate Walk to Constitutional Crisis. We're in it now, Tim.
Well, let me just follow up on that point because, he's tweeted and you're right. He said he's not going to, but isn't there a difference between saying you're not going to follow a judge's injunction versus actually not following it? It seems to me that they're doing a lot of talk and it hasn't come to that point where they flat out have a refusal and the reminder of a judge saying, this is my ruling, you will follow it. Aren't we quite at a separate point right now?
Yes, he said that, but I think he's also doing it. And when he says he's going to ignore the courts, I believe him because there's all these indicators that, to that effect. So I think what we have is a president who's completely unhinged and irresponsible and in violation of the Constitution and so many congressional acts. You could argue that it's just rhetoric, but it seems to me to be much more than rhetoric.
It doesn't help to have our vice president basically say that the president is the final the word when it comes to the Constitution and how the executive branch views the Constitution. It doesn't help. One of the nice things about doing these shows is you learn a few things. And apparently there was an 1803 Supreme Court decision by Chief Justice Marshall. It was Marbury versus Madison, very famous court case that delineates what the judges are all about and what the judicial branch is all about. And the outcome of that decision was when the court says it's final, it's final. And that was settled back in 1803. And sure, there's been cases along the way that further define the authority of the judicial branch. But there it is. And so this looks like a power grab from the casual observer here. And is it just that, Jay? Is it a power grab or are they just playing a game of chicken?
Interesting question. Well, I think it is a power grab. And I also think it's a game of chicken. Like pathological politicians, and for that matter, lawyers who are involved in litigation. You go as far as you can go. You use your pathology. You wait for the other side or the judge to stop you, and you keep on going. It's just a sign of the pathology. So, no, I think it's both. And I think if he isn't stopped, I mean, really meaningfully stopped, and I'm not sure that's going to happen, he'll continue to do this, and it will be more and more a power grab every day.
All right. Thank you. Hey, Ben, these judges, these federal judges, they've got some tools, in their tool bag to address a situation like this. One of them could be the judges will continue to prod for compliance. Judges have the authority to, implement monetary damages to gain compliance. Or, as you know, as a law professor, they certainly can order a contempt of court order.
Right.
If you're one of these judges where Donald Trump and the administration just flat out refuses, what tools would you be tempted to use? Would you start low or work high, or did you just go right to the top order of contempt?
I think, and if people watched what happened with Juan Merchan in that criminal case with Trump, I think the orientation of the judges is to sort of be incremental, right?
Mm-hmm.
They're not going to go all the way to the end. Personally, sometimes I wonder if that's not an error, but it's just kind of the way they are, is that that, or maybe that they're trained as a judge, that you don't really go to the max or close to the max right away. So I think that they, for example, I mean, just this to sort of a structural one is that somebody walks in the court, says, I need a temporary restraining order. That's kind of the lowest level thing with a high bar to get it. But the judge says, okay, I'll give you that. The next thing up is going to be like a preliminary injunction. And then the next thing is up a permanent injunction. Each of those is like ratcheting up, you see, in terms of the process. But what I would just add is that, yes, we are in a constitutional crisis. I do believe that when Trump says things where he doesn't say he's going to comply with the court orders, I believe him. And by the way, when he says that he will comply with court orders, I don't believe him. Okay, I mean, it's just that's the way I react. Because yesterday he said, I don't. He says, I don't. I obey orders. I just will appeal them. On the whole, I think the judges were going to sort of ratchet things up. I would like to add, if I could, that there is a very bizarre thing going on with regards to what that Levitt was saying or what Vance was saying. I mean, let's just take the two hypotheticals of Vance. If a general of the United States was committing war crimes, he could be held up before a uniform code of military justice, court-martial. Generals have been court-martialed with regard, there's a military judge there, could be even a federal judge, depending on how it all sets up, and have to answer for the way that they were conducting the war. But since they don't teach military law at law schools anymore, that went right past this Yale, I guess. The second one is if the Department of Justice was, let's say a prosecuting Department of Justice was doing something that violated due process, a court would say it, and that would limit what that prosecutor could do. So the answer is, of course, courts would come in and say things if there's a problem, So, the idea that somehow the executive is above any kind of court scrutiny, that went out with Marbury versus Madison, as you mentioned. As to Levitt, I mean, you can't have it both ways, where you're happy with the presidential immunity decision on the one hand, but you're not happy when they slap down your hand on the other hand and say, you can't do what is lawless. All you have to do is go to Congress, get Congress to agree to dismantle the thing, agree to cut the money. That's what you do. You don't get to just sneak in the back room and grab the checkbook and run away with it like the Doge folks, though. That the courts are just saying those kind of things. You don't get to change the wording of the Constitution just because you feel like it. That's what the court said about the birthright thing. You see what I'm saying?
Yeah.
You don't get to send people to Gitmo just because you think it's a great idea. I mean, it's like, yeah, there are limits. It's called something. What is it called? Rule of law. That's what it is.
Oh,
That's
that
what
one.
it is. That thing. Yeah, that thing. You know what I mean? It's just, yeah,
Let me throw out I want to get your opinion on this. Let me
Yeah.
throw out a little of a life ring out there in the water. And that is, there was concern that the Supreme Court, has been handpicked by Donald Trump. They're loyal to Donald Trump, and they'll basically rule in favor of Donald Trump on multiple cases. Chief Justice Roberts basically said recently that elected officials that are openly dismissing court rulings must be soundly rejected. And he wasn't specifically citing any particular case. He's saying, in the past, elected officials are just routinely starting to dismiss those rulings. Do you see this as a hopeful statement that maybe once in a while that the Supreme Court will be not looking at who hired them or who put them in their place, in their position as a Supreme Court judge, and actually rule on the merits of the law?
Only to the extent that there are enough people out there in society that are making it an issue, whatever is going on. If there are people in the streets, I think that demonstrating all that kind of stuff, there's a lot of animation, and also if there are cases that are being brought by states, there's like those, because in our structure with James Madison's idea is that the states were sovereign too. So it was that dual sovereignty that would protect us, along with the separation of powers. So when you start to get bodies like the states that are there, and then people in the streets that are pushing against a particular kind of rule, if you are somebody who is not going to listen to court orders, that's not going to, I think that the Supreme Court will not be happy. I'm not saying all 9, okay? But I think you could get 5 that would say, that's wrong. I mean, we saw that case. What was the case? I can't remember it, where it was 5-4 with Roberts and Amy Coney Barrett going over with the liberal side. I can't remember what it was at, but it was really a troubling moment for the court, and they ended up leaning that way. So,
well, I'll bring one further. Let's go back to 2020 on the plus 50 challenges to the election by the Trump folks, and they were all soundly rejected. Not all of them were Supreme Court decisions, of course.
Yeah.
But the ones that did go to the Supreme Court were either not heard or were ruled on. Maybe with Clarence Thomas as one of dissension, but they did their job back in 2020.
Oh yeah, and one of the things that you made me just think of is yesterday you had Elon Musk in the Oval Office talking about all this fraud, corruption, and all these, and telling these stories. I think there's like a 150-year-old person who's getting money from Social Security. But, you say that kind of thing to the judge, and what happened in those 50 cases when they said there was all that fraud in the election, the judge said, all right, bring the evidence. Show me the evidence. And they didn't have it. So if you don't have the evidence, you don't win the case, And that's, the folks think that just because they say something magically, that's going to be truth. The courts will say, with the rules, show me the evidence. And if you don't have it, you lose. It's really simple. I mean, and they don't have it. So the fact that they don't have it means that they try to keep blowing smoke at us to get us to go along with them and believe what they're saying. I don't believe a single word that comes out of Elon Musk's mouth. I don't believe a single word that comes out of Donald Trump's mouth. I don't believe a single word that comes out of any part of this government under executive orders or whatever about anything related to corruption. Or the only thing I believe in is that there's a high risk of bribery and corruption by these folks themselves. That's the thing. It's kind of that what is that term? Projection. They're like doing projection on what they are doing. I don't know if you saw, but the President of the United States said to the Attorney General, don't enforce the Foreign Corrupt Practices Act. The great thing about the Foreign Corrupt Practices Act for American companies is when somebody wanted a bribe, you could say, hey, I'm sorry, but there's this law in the States. But now you're leaving all these companies subject to the person. I want a bribe, and by the way, they're not going to prosecute you. So come on, you get the bribe. You give me, I mean, you put them in these, but they go ahead and say that they get rid of the kleptocracy division at the Department of Justice. On and on. You see, basically saying we are open for bribery.
Thanks, Ben. Jay, Ben brings up a great point. Is they say one thing and it's completely opposite of what their position is. And I'm thinking specifically on their accusation that the justice system was weaponized for January 6th. Yet here the new Trump administration is weaponizing the executive branch, going after FBI agents, firing prosecutors left and right, and saying, well, that's not the same. We're not weaponizing anything. We're just doing the executive, the authority of the executive office to do these things. And there are judges saying, well, not so fast. So, I mean, there's a high level of hypocrisy going on here. And I guess, Jay, the question to you is, with all this retaliation, particularly of career service employees, not appointed employees, but career service, when does this merry-go-round end with judge saying, stop it, stop firing FBI agents, putting them on a prosecutor's list for investigation for their assignments in January 6th, and stop firing prosecutors without just cause?
How is that different from Carolyn Levitt's comment that the courts are being activist?
Mm-hmm.
It's a lie, right?
It's a lie.
How is that
Okay.
different? How is that different than the 60 cases in Stop the Steal, where very nearly all of those courts said, then you don't have a case? And Ben, you thought about coming in with evidence. Well, we're happy to see that some judges remember what evidence is, but I'm here to tell you, not all of them do. And you could file a phony affidavit and get by that. You can create hearsay in a declaration and get by that. And I think we're going to see more of that. I think the point I would like to make, though, and this trips off what Ben was saying about the U.S. Marshals, for example. Okay, so Judge Juan Ferran says, you're in violation of my order. Have you noticed? You violated my order directly. You're in contempt. I'm holding in contempt. And Mr. Trump, I would like you to go down to the Tombs prison in the jail and present yourself for a week or longer if it takes for you to reverse yourself. Okay. I don't think that's going to happen. Or the U.S. Marshal goes to the White House and says, "Excuse me, I'm here to see the president so I can arrest him for contempt." You think that's going to work?
Before they do that, they have to get Pam Bondi, our Attorney General's permission to do so.
What I'm saying is that state judges, federal judges, and the like, even the Supreme Court, they don't have a methodology, an instrumentality by which they can enforce these orders against a public official by force. Come with me, sir. It's time for you to get in the car. That can't happen. It won't happen. So these judges know that. If you were a sitting judge and you saw in front of you contempt and you saw a violation of your order, you don't have a lot of options. Okay, I'm holding you in contempt and I'm calling the New York Times. Okay, thanks very much. That's useful. But I can't arrest you. I can't physically stop you. And that is where you get into a full-blown constitutional crisis, where the judge says one thing and the president says, "The hell with you. I'm not doing it. And you can take a walk and you can send somebody to White House to arrest me. We're going to arrest him."
When I was looking at the 1803 Mulberry versus Madison, Chief Justice Marshall had made a ruling in a different case about the unlawful removal of the members of the Cherokee Nation off their lands. I don't know if it was a reservation or not, but Andrew Jackson, President Andrew Jackson didn't like that ruling. He said, "Okay, so the court can make this decision. Now let's see how they implement it."
My great grandmother was a full-blooded Cherokee, so but see, the thing about that is, I don't know if you remember Stalin saying something about the Pope how many divisions does the Pope have or something like that? When I mean, it's the same kind of attitude, right? That is there. But, and I'm not sanguine, okay? I'm not just saying, oh, it's no big deal. But the tension is that if you don't follow the court order, okay, then you are lawless, okay? I mean, that's what happens across the system. You are revealed as being lawless. And that, I think, is a big deal for a lot of different entities in this country, including the business sector, all those kind of things, seeing it's having to deal with a lawless executive, okay? I'm not saying that all the business are, but I think they're the lawyers. I don't know if you saw this, but the American Bar Association came out with a statement saying, the rule of law is in danger. Now, that's the largest lawyers group in this country, right? You get those kind of civil society reactions to people that I think have impact. One of the things it also has is on the people who work inside there who are not the loyalists. They're not going to, they hesitate. So I don't know. I'm just thinking that once I think the fact that Trump is hiding his not complying with the orders, or the Doge people are hiding that, is just showing how nervous they are about being revealed as being lawless, I think.
It's not just that they're hiding it, they're getting away with it. And I think an essential element of our constitutional democracy is rule of law, is the respect for the rule of law. And when you find that public officials are looking you right in the eye and saying, we don't follow that, we don't abide by the rule of law. And then when you find that the judges on the Supreme Court are finding ways to avoid what is obviously the rule of law, I'm thinking of Section 3 of the 14th Amendment, which would have disqualified him. No matter how you analyze that, and certainly the Supreme Court of Colorado correctly analyzed it.
Thank you. Yes.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's very clear what it says, just like the birthright, just very clear what it says. And yet the Supreme Court found a way around it. So what you have is this kind of plenary rejection of the obvious language in the Constitution and the rule of law, that is, respect the Constitution, respect the statutes. So what we have now is a disrespect for the statutes. It doesn't matter what statute. Any disrespect is a constitutional crisis.
Yep.
It amazes me that these guys ignore it. And, you can say that they have said they would, or maybe inferred or implied they would. That is horrendous in a constitutional democracy. So I think we're well on the road now. And I don't actually, I hate to tell you guys this. I'm going to whisper it. Okay, I'm going to whisper it. This is the road to perdition. And it's a road you can't come back on.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, I agree that we're on the road. The question is, are we there just yet? And I hear from both of you saying, yes, we're in the beginning phases of that road to perdition. Let me just throw this out, Jay or Ben. Either of you can respond to this. But it seems to me that there's two ways of a constitutional crisis. One is that you have a face-off between two branches, and there's nothing clear in the Constitution that resolves that face-off. That's number one. Number two is no one cares. Either side doesn't care. They're not going to blink, and they're willing to take it to the very end. And I'm thinking of the Nixon case where it came to that. The Supreme Court said, you will hand over those tapes or else. And in the end, we all know that Nixon blinked, and he did turn over the tapes. Are we at a point right now where we have two branches of our government faced off and going to take it to the end? No one's blinking. Are we there yet? Because I don't think we are. But how soon does it take before we get to that point? Then we're truly in a constitutional crisis.
Let me answer that by telling you, actually, in the reality of things, there are more than three branches of government. You guys are sitting down. You can hear me out on this. Okay. There's the press.
Yes.
The press is clearly a branch of government. And if it wasn't before, if it wasn't at the time of the founding, it certainly is now. And so when there's a violation of an order, a contempt, what have you, the press can weigh in, and hopefully does. But remember, he's attacking the press.
Right.
He's attacking the press in every way he can. I mean, just for a really interesting and ridiculous example, there's somebody from the AP refused to call the Gulf of Mexico the Gulf of America. So he withdrew the press pass of that reporter. And that reporter can't get in the White House anymore. Now, to me, that's a violation of the First Amendment, very clearly. But it's so stupid and silly, that you say, oh, well, let's not get too excited about this. And if he wanted to change the name, he could change the name. But he goes further than that. He withdraws the access to information from that particular media. Okay. So anyway, the press is definitely a branch of government in the reality of our world. And there's one more. Maybe I've forgotten some here, but there's one more. I'll tell you what it is. Are you ready? Are you sitting down? This would be the fifth. It's the stock market. There was an article in the paper yesterday about the stock market and how the stock market was blowing off all the things that Trump was doing. They were ignoring it, and the stocks go up. And maybe it's because of the oligarchs and the wealthy people who invest in the stock market and all that. But they have a lot to say. If the stock market goes down, that's tremendous influence on Trump and his administration. But it hasn't, not really. When it goes down, and I suggest to you it will go down if this continues, then you have the fifth branch of government, the stock market, weighing in on things. And we don't get to a full, total crisis, an economic crisis, an information crisis, a civil rights crisis, a complete constitutional crisis until all of those five branches have been compromised.
Astute observation. Thank you. Yeah, we've run out of time, so I wish we could go on for another half hour, but we just can't. So, Ben, let's get your final thoughts on this topic and anything you feel is pertinent to say.
I would say that Doge is on its last legs. I still think that the Doge is on. I may be wrong, but I think Doge is on his last legs, and Elon Musk is close to being gone, as well as his minions from inside there, because there are too many court decisions that are blocking what he's trying to do. And if he's going to go lawless, things go further lawless, it really reflects badly on Trump. And one thing Trump doesn't like is to be looked at badly. So,
all right, thank you, Jay. You get the final word, and let it fly.
Well, Borowitz on Substack is one of my favorites. And he had this really funny piece about how one of those young acolytes that Musk brought in to flim-flam the computers made a mistake. And he actually drained Elon Musk's account.
yes,
And at the end of that effort, by mistake, of course, by mistake. And at the end of that effort, Musk's net worth was zero. The result, of course, is that Musk was very excited, so he called the president, and his call went straight to voicemail. Musk's popularity in the White House is dependent on A, doing things that are disruptive, which Trump wants. Trump wants there to be chaos. This is in his playbook. And B, his ability to bail Trump out, to give him money, maybe hundreds of millions or billions if he gets in trouble. And when those things soften, I will have to agree with Ben that his influence in the White House and his sustainability as the Doge guy will have to end. Two other thoughts on that is that Doge is illegal. Doge is not a department of the United States government. Doge is vaporware. It got created out of whole cloth, as so many other things in our world today. And I hope there's a judge out there somewhere who'll say Doge is illegal and everything it's done is illegal, and he has to be rolled back. What he did, is all of no consequence. It is hereby invalidated. That would be good. I haven't seen that yet. But if you ask me whether I have a level of optimism about this, I don't, because I go back, and this is my final comment, I go back to the notion that pathological people tend to, drill down and do more if they succeed in what they're trying. And I think that's ultimately what's happening here.
All righty. I would like to conclude by saying thank you, gentlemen, for your astute observations and comments. I'd like to thank my special esteemed guest, Ben Davis, and my co-host, Jay Fidell, and close by saying, keep calm and carry on. And until then, this is American Issues Take One. I'm Tim Apicella, your host. Join us next week, and aloha.